The morning light crept through the half-closed blinds, casting thin golden lines across the floor. I could hear the kettle start to boil in the kitchen. She was already up. She always woke before me, like her body ran on some invisible schedule I'd never understand. I rolled out of bed slowly, stretching the tension from my shoulders as the scent of coffee drifted in. It was one of those unspoken rituals we'd formed. She'd make the coffee. I'd bring the mugs. No one had planned it. It just happened. Like a lot of things between us, when I walked into the kitchen, she was already seated at the little table by the window, phone in one hand, the other wrapped around a steaming cup. Her hair was tied up in that messy way that looked effortless. She looked up and smiled, a small, sleepy kind of smile that made my chest tighten in that frustrating, quiet way it always did around her. "Morning," she said, her voice soft and slightly raspy. "You're up late today." I shrugged and grabbed the second mug, pouring myself a cup, avoiding her gaze for just a second longer than normal. "Couldn't sleep much," I said. That we chatted, lightly, about nothing in particular, weather, work, some weird show we were watching together on the weekends. But there was something in the way she spoke, a flicker of hesitation I couldn't quite catch. Like she was holding something just behind her teeth, deciding not to say it. I didn't push. I never did. But I noticed. I always noticed. After breakfast, we went our separate ways. She had an early shift, and I had some writing to finish for a freelance client. Hours passed. The apartment stayed quiet. I worked, but I kept thinking about last night, the soft footsteps in the hall just past midnight, the faint sound of a voice behind her door. I had convinced myself I imagined it. Maybe a dream. But even now, in the bright light of morning, the memory tugged at me. She came back late in the evening. It was raining, and her jacket was soaked through. I handed her a towel without a word, and she took it, her fingers brushing mine for a second longer than they needed to. That touch sparked a little heat in my skin, and I quickly pulled away, pretending not to feel anything. We watched a movie together that night. Something silly and light, a romantic comedy she picked. I tried not to read into her choices, but sometimes, it felt like she chose certain things to send me quiet messages. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that. We sat close on the couch, our shoulders touching. I didn't move. Neither did she. And somewhere in that warmth, I felt safe. Too safe. Maybe that it wasn't until much later, when the movie ended and we'd both said goodnight, that the air in the apartment shifted again. I was curled under my blanket, scrolling half-heartedly through my phone, when I heard her door open. The creak was soft, like she was trying not to wake me. But I was already wide awake. I stayed still. Listening. Waiting. Her footsteps moved gently down the hallway. A quiet pause. Then a whisper. I couldn't tell if she was on the phone or just talking to herself, but the tone was low, intimate. There was no anger. No fear. Just softness. It felt private. And suddenly, I felt like a stranger in my own home. That I sat up slowly, holding my breath. My door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I saw the hallway lit faintly by the bathroom light. Her shadow moved past, then paused. I froze, not sure if she knew I was awake. She didn't knock. Didn't call my name. Just stood there for a second, silent. Then she walked back to her room and closed the door behind her. I heard the click of the lock. That I lay back down, my mind racing. What was she doing? Who was she talking to? Or, was she talking to herself? The questions turned over and over in my head, but the worst part wasn't not knowing. It was realizing how much I wanted to know. How much I cared. More than I should. More than a roommate should. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept seeing her silhouette in the hallway. Kept hearing the whisper that wasn't meant for me. Something had changed. I could feel it in my bones. And yet, nothing had really happened. Not yet. But I knew the way you know when a storm is coming, when the air feels too still, too quiet, like it's holding a secret it refuses to share. Something was unfolding in front of me. slowly, quietly. After midnight. The morning felt heavy, like the apartment itself had soaked up the tension from the night before. I didn't sleep well. I kept tossing, turning, thinking about her voice in the hallway, the way her shadow had paused outside my door, the way her door had clicked shut behind her. It kept looping in my head, and every time it did, my chest tightened a little more. I got up later than usual. She was already gone, which was both a relief and a disappointment. A relief because I didn't know what to say. A disappointment because a part of me wanted to see her face, to try and read something in her expression, anything to help make sense of the strange feeling that had taken root in me. That I wandered around the apartment for a while, coffee in hand, stopping in the hallway without meaning to. I stared at her closed door. It looked just the same as it always did. But now it held a mystery. A thin, invisible barrier between who I thought she was and who she might actually be. I didn't try to open it, of course. That would have been a violation. But the idea flickered in my mind for a second longer than it should have. And that scared me that I spent most of the day pretending to work. My laptop sat open, the cursor blinking on a blank document. My thoughts weren't with my deadlines. They were with her. I kept thinking about her smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, how she'd sometimes pause mid-sentence like she was afraid of saying too much. I thought about the time we sat on the floor eating takeout after a long day, laughing over something ridiculous, and how her eyes had lingered on me a second too long. I had ignored it then. Told myself it meant nothing. But now I wasn't so sure. Maybe I had been blind. Or maybe I had just been scared to see what was right in front of me. Evening crept in slowly, dragging the shadows along the walls. The apartment felt quieter than usual, like it was waiting for something. I found myself standing outside her room again, this time deliberately. I listened. Nothing. The silence almost disappointed me. I turned and walked toward the living room, trying to distract myself with another mindless movie. But my eyes kept flicking toward the hallway. My heart beat a little faster with every creak and thump the apartment made, even if it was just the old pipes or the wind outside. Then, just past midnight, I heard her door open again. That soft creak. The familiar footsteps. My pulse quickened. I muted the TV and leaned back into the couch, pretending to be asleep. She moved quietly, her steps not heading for the kitchen or bathroom this time. I heard a small sound, maybe the squeak of her bedroom window or the click of her phone being unlocked. I got up silently, patting down the hallway in my socks, heart thudding in my ears. I didn't mean to snoop. I told myself that over and over. But I needed to see. Just to understand that I reached her door, and there was a small gap where it hadn't fully closed. I held my breath, peering in just enough to catch a glimpse. She was sitting on the floor by her bed, legs crossed, phone in hand, typing something quickly. Her face was lit by the screen, a soft, warm glow catching the edges of her features. She looked focused, almost vulnerable. I could see the corner of a journal beside her, its pages messy, scribbled in. I couldn't read the words, but the emotion on her face was unmistakable. She looked like she was pouring something out, something raw. And in that moment, it hit me like a wave. She wasn't okay. All her quietness, the way she disappeared after midnight, the way she avoided certain questions, it wasn't just random. She was holding something in. And I hated that she felt like she couldn't share it with me. I stepped back before she could see me, heart aching with a guilt I didn't fully understand. I wasn't supposed to see her like that. But I had. And now the image wouldn't leave me. That I went back to my room, crawled under the blanket, and stared at the ceiling. Everything about her made sense and didn't, all at once. I thought I knew her. I thought our late-night conversations and movie marathons meant we were close. But maybe I had only scratched the surface. Maybe she was trying to tell me something all along. In the little moments I didn't pay enough attention to. As I closed my eyes, I realized something deeper, something terrifying. I wasn't just curious about her secrets. I was scared of how much I wanted to be part of them. I was scared of what it would mean if she let me in. Or worse, if she didn't. The morning's sunlight felt too bright. It slipped through the blinds and landed across my face, forcing my eyes open before I was ready. I lay still for a few moments, replaying everything I had seen the night before. Her, sitting on the floor, pouring something into her phone, and that messy notebook beside her. The look on her face, so focused, so vulnerable, it stayed with me like a fingerprint on glass. I didn't know what she was writing, or who it was for, but it stirred something in me that I couldn't put back where it belonged. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Why didn't she want me to know? When I finally made it out of my room, she was already in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal absent-mindedly, headphones in her ears. She looked up when I entered and smiled, that familiar warm smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes today. She pulled out one earbud. "Morning," she said softly. "You sleep okay?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah. You?" She paused, just a beat too long. "Same." We stood there in silence for a moment that felt heavy, like both of us wanted to say something but neither of us knew how. We sat at the table and ate in near silence. The usual easy flow of conversation was missing. Every sentence felt like a test, like we were both waiting for the other to slip and reveal something we weren't supposed to know. I found myself watching her more closely than usual, how her fingers tapped the edge of her bowl, how her eyes flicked to her phone every few seconds, the way she seemed both present and far away at the same time. It was like she was holding something inside so tightly that if she let go, it might spill everywhere. That I wanted to ask her about last night. I wanted to say, "I saw you," but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I asked something safer. "Hey, do you ever write stuff down? Like, just for yourself?" Her spoon froze mid-air for a split second. Then she shrugged. "Sometimes." "Why?" I looked down at my own bowl, pretending to be casual. "I don't know. I've been thinking a lot lately. Trying to figure stuff out, I guess." She gave a small smile. "Yeah. Same here." That was all she said. She didn't ask what I meant. Didn't offer anything else. And I didn't push. But that tiny exchange felt like a thread being pulled loose. Something small, but important. After she left for work, I spent the afternoon pacing the apartment, trying to make sense of everything. I thought about all the nights we had spent watching shows, talking about the stupid little things that didn't matter. And underneath it all, how often she would glance at me and quickly look away. How sometimes our hands would touch when we passed each other a drink or brushed past in the hallway, and neither of us would move away quickly. There were moments I had buried, convinced myself didn't mean anything. But now they came back, one after another, like tiny sparks catching fire, and in the middle of all those memories, I realized something that made my stomach twist. I liked her. Not just liked her the way friends do. It was deeper. It was messier. And maybe it had been there for longer than I was willing to admit. I sat on the couch, holding my knees to my chest, letting that feeling settle inside me. It scared me. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wasn't sure if she felt it too. When she came home that evening, the air between us felt different. Charged. Like we were both tiptoeing around something neither of us could name yet. She sat down next to me on the couch, a little closer than usual. Our arms touched, and neither of us pulled away. I felt the warmth of her skin against mine, and my heart started to pound. We talked about her day, and I listened, nodding, smiling, but I was only half there. The other half of me was drowning in the question, does she feel this too? She laughed at something I said, this quiet, breathy laugh that made my stomach flip. I looked at her, and for a second, she looked back at me in a way that made the whole room go still. Her eyes lingered just a moment too long, her smile softening into something quieter, more real. Then she blinked and looked away, clearing her throat. I'm gonna shower, she mumbled, standing up quickly. And just like that, the moment passed. But it left a mark. Something had shifted. I could feel it in my bones. As the bathroom door closed behind her, I sat alone on the couch, heart racing. I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't be. That look, it meant something. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was just friendship. Not anymore. Not after the way she looked at me. Not after the way I felt when she wasn't looking. Something was building between us. Quiet, slow, and completely unstoppable. The apartment was quiet again, the kind of stillness that made every sound feel louder. I stayed on the couch long after she went into the bathroom, staring at the blank TV screen, trying to calm the storm inside my chest. The image of her looking at me, just for that split second, kept replaying in my mind. There was no mistaking it this time. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't casual. It was filled with something softer, deeper. But if she felt it, why hadn't she said anything? Why was she still disappearing after midnight? Why did she look like she was hiding a part of herself I wasn't allowed to see? She came out of the bathroom a while later, her hair damp, dressed in a hoodie and shorts, her skin still glowing from the heat of the shower. She gave me a tired smile, one I returned with shaky nerves. We didn't talk much after that. She said she was going to bed early, and I just nodded. I watched her close her door behind her, and I sat there, thinking. Thinking way too much. My hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. My thoughts wouldn't quiet. I kept wondering what she was doing at night. Who she was texting. What she was writing. And most of all, why it mattered so much to me now. Midnight crept up again like it had the night before. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the space. I hadn't gone to bed yet. I couldn't. I sat in the dark, waiting without even realizing I was waiting. And then it happened, just like before. Her door creaked open. Soft footsteps. That familiar hush that seemed to fall over everything when she walked into the hallway. My breath caught. I didn't move, this time. I followed that I didn't mean to. It wasn't planned. But something inside me pulled me forward before I could stop myself. She walked quietly down the hall and into the spare room we barely used. The door stayed cracked open, just like her bedroom door had the night before. I stepped slowly, my socks muffling the sound, and stood just outside the frame, peering in. She was sitting on the floor again, her back resting against the wall, knees drawn up, a notebook in her lap and her phone next to her. The light from a small lamp on the floor lit her face gently. She looked calm, but her eyes carried something else, sadness, maybe. Or longing. She opened the notebook and started writing, her pen moving quickly across the page. Every few lines, she'd pause, glance at her phone, then write again. I could see her lips moving slightly, mouthing words she wasn't saying out loud. She looked like she was having a conversation only she could hear. That I couldn't make out what she was writing. But I saw the emotion in her face. She wasn't just journaling. She was pouring something out. Something heavy. Something she couldn't say out loud. And then, like a sudden wave crashing against me, I knew. It wasn't just loneliness. It wasn't just secrets. It was her heart. She was hiding her heart in those pages that I stepped back quietly, heart pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it. I went back to my room, closed the door gently, and leaned against it, trying to breathe. My mind was spinning. Part of me wanted to confront her, to ask what it all meant. But the other part, the scared part, knew she wasn't ready. And maybe, neither was I. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, her face etched behind my eyes. I remembered the softness of her laugh, the heat of her arm against mine, the way her eyes lingered. I thought about how long I'd been holding this in, pretending I didn't feel more than I should, hiding behind casual smiles and light conversation. But the truth was heavy now. I liked her. I wanted her. And I couldn't unfeel that, the worst part. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know if she wanted me to know. Or if she'd be scared if I did. Maybe she was writing about someone else. Maybe those late-night whispers weren't meant for me at all. That thought crushed me more than I expected. The idea that she could be pouring her soul out for someone else made my stomach twist with something that felt like jealousy, but I had no right to feel that way. Not yet. Not until I knew for sure. Still, that image of her alone, writing in the dark, wouldn't let me go. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to keep it all in. But I stayed silent. For now that I drifted off just as the sun began to rise, her name lingering in my mind, like a word left unspoken, aching to be heard. The next morning was awkward in a way that neither of us dared to acknowledge. She stood by the kitchen counter pouring cereal into a bowl while I made toast, both of us dancing around each other in this quiet, nervous rhythm. There were moments when our eyes almost met, and then one of us would look away, pretending to be focused on something else. I could feel the weight of everything I hadn't said pressing against my ribs. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath all the time. I wanted to tell her that I knew about her late-night writing, that I saw the pain on her face and the longing in her eyes, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I figured out how much of this feeling between us was real that we ate in near silence again, and it hurt in a way that surprised me. Before, silence had been comfortable. Now it felt full of questions neither of us wanted to ask. I kept stealing glances at her, watching the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she stirred her cereal slowly without really eating it. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that came from holding too much inside. I wanted to reach across the table, take her hand, and say, "You don't have to carry it all alone." But the words stayed buried in my throat. After breakfast, we parted ways again. She had errands to run, and I had a few online meetings to get through. But I couldn't focus. Her presence, or maybe her absence, was like static in my mind, always buzzing in the background. I kept thinking about everything that had led up to this. The quiet nights. The shared laughs. The moments that lingered a little too long. There was a time when I convinced myself it was one-sided, that I was just projecting feelings onto someone who was kind and close and convenient. But not anymore. Something had shifted. Her look. Her silence. The way she kept coming out at midnight, as if that was the only time she could truly be herself. By late afternoon, I was pacing my room, nerves wound too tight. I couldn't do this anymore, not like this. I needed answers. I needed to know if what I was feeling wasn't just in my head. I told myself I would wait for the right moment, that I wouldn't push, but that was a lie. I wasn't waiting anymore. Tonight, I would talk to her. I would ask her. And no matter what she said, at least I'd know. Dinner was quiet again, but different this time. There was a kind of tension in the air, like we both sensed something was about to break. We barely touched our food. She sat across from me, eyes flicking toward mine and away again, fingers tapping on the table like she was trying to say something but didn't know how. I almost hoped she would bring it up first. That maybe she'd confess whatever she was hiding and save me the fear of being the one to speak first. But she didn't. So I waited. Again, later that night, I stood by my door, listening. I didn't know if she'd come out again, if she'd keep her routine. But at 12:07 a.m., like clockwork, I heard the soft creak. My heart started pounding. I waited until I heard her steps fade down the hallway. Then I followed. I didn't try to hide this time. I walked slowly, deliberately. When I reached the doorway to the spare room, she was sitting there again, same spot, same notebook in her lap. But this time, she looked up and saw me, her eyes widened, startled, and her whole body went tense. She closed the notebook quickly, almost like she was embarrassed. I froze, suddenly unsure of what I was doing. But I had come this far. I had to say something. "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice shaking. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." She looked down at the notebook in her lap, then back at me, her face softening just a little. "It's okay," she said, though her voice barely carried. "I guess I knew you'd notice eventually." I stepped into the room, just far enough to lean against the doorframe. My hands trembled slightly, and I tried to still them. "I heard you, a few nights ago. And I saw you writing. I didn't want to invade your privacy, but I hesitated. I've been thinking about you. A lot." She didn't speak. Just looked at me, something unreadable in her eyes. I kept going, afraid if I stopped, I wouldn't say it at all. "I don't know what you're writing. Or who it's about. But it matters to you. I can see that. And I guess. I'm just wondering if it has anything to do with me." Silence stretched between us, long and painful. She looked down, fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. Then finally, she nodded. Just once. And it was all I needed to know. My heart cracked open and flooded with every emotion I'd been holding back. I stepped closer, not sure what I was doing, only knowing that I couldn't stay silent anymore. "I like you," I said quietly. "More than I should. Maybe more than you want me to. But I do." She looked up at me, eyes wide and glassy, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Everything hung in the air between us, trembling on the edge of something we both wanted but were too scared to reach for, and then she whispered, "Me too." The next morning was awkward in a way that neither of us dared to acknowledge. She stood by the kitchen counter pouring cereal into a bowl while I made toast, both of us dancing around each other in this quiet, nervous rhythm. There were moments when our eyes almost met, and then one of us would look away, pretending to be focused on something else. I could feel the weight of everything I hadn't said pressing against my ribs. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath all the time. I wanted to tell her that I knew about her late-night writing, that I saw the pain on her face and the longing in her eyes, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I figured out how much of this feeling between us was real. We ate in near silence again, and it hurt in a way that surprised me. Before, silence had been comfortable. Now it felt full of questions neither of us wanted to ask. I kept stealing glances at her, watching the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she stirred her cereal slowly without really eating it. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that came from holding too much inside. I wanted to reach across the table, take her hand, and say, "You don't have to carry it all alone." But the words stayed buried in my throat. After breakfast, we parted ways again. She had errands to run, and I had a few online meetings to get through. But I couldn't focus. Her presence, or maybe her absence, was like static in my mind, always buzzing in the background. I kept thinking about everything that had led up to this. The quiet nights. The shared laughs. The moments that lingered a little too long. There was a time when I convinced myself it was one-sided, that I was just projecting feelings onto someone who was kind and close and convenient. But not anymore. Something had shifted. Her look. Her silence. The way she kept coming out at midnight, as if that was the only time she could truly be herself. By late afternoon, I was pacing my room, nerves wound too tight. I couldn't do this anymore, not like this. I needed answers. I needed to know if what I was feeling wasn't just in my head. I told myself I would wait for the right moment, that I wouldn't push, but that was a lie. I wasn't waiting anymore. Tonight, I would talk to her. I would ask her. And no matter what she said, at least I'd know. Dinner was quiet again, but different this time. There was a kind of tension in the air, like we both sensed something was about to break. We barely touched our food. She sat across from me, eyes flicking toward mine and away again, fingers tapping on the table like she was trying to say something but didn't know how. I almost hoped she would bring it up first. That maybe she'd confess whatever she was hiding and save me the fear of being the one to speak first. But she didn't. So I waited. Again, later that night, I stood by my door, listening. I didn't know if she'd come out again, if she'd keep her routine. But at 12:07 a.m., like clockwork, I heard the soft creak. My heart started pounding. I waited until I heard her steps fade down the hallway. Then I followed. I didn't try to hide this time. I walked slowly, deliberately. When I reached the doorway to the spare room, she was sitting there again, same spot, same notebook in her lap. But this time, she looked up and saw me, her eyes widened, startled, and her whole body went tense. She closed the notebook quickly, almost like she was embarrassed. I froze, suddenly unsure of what I was doing. But I had come this far. I had to say something. "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice shaking. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." She looked down at the notebook in her lap, then back at me, her face softening just a little. "It's okay," she said, though her voice barely carried. "I guess I knew you'd notice eventually." I stepped into the room, just far enough to lean against the doorframe. My hands trembled slightly, and I tried to still them. "I heard you, a few nights ago. And I saw you writing. I didn't want to invade your privacy, but I hesitated. I've been thinking about you. A lot." She didn't speak. Just looked at me, something unreadable in her eyes. I kept going, afraid if I stopped, I wouldn't say it at all. "I don't know what you're writing. Or who it's about. But it matters to you. I can see that. And I guess. I'm just wondering if it has anything to do with me." Silence stretched between us, long and painful. She looked down, fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. Then finally, she nodded. Just once. And it was all I needed to know. My heart cracked open and flooded with every emotion I'd been holding back. I stepped closer, not sure what I was doing, only knowing that I couldn't stay silent anymore. "I like you," I said quietly. "More than I should. Maybe more than you want me to. But I do." She looked up at me, eyes wide and glassy, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Everything hung in the air between us, trembling on the edge of something we both wanted but were too scared to reach for, and then she whispered, "Me too." The room felt too small after that. Her eyes stayed on mine, and for a few seconds, we didn't say anything else. We just looked at each other, and the silence between us didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. It felt necessary. Like words would only ruin the moment. I could see the fear behind her eyes, but also relief. Like she'd been waiting for me to say something first, too afraid to take the risk herself. My chest felt tight, but in a different way now. It wasn't anxiety anymore. It was this deep, aching kind of warmth. I took a step closer, slowly, watching her body language for any sign of resistance. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Her fingers were still holding the notebook, but now it just rested in her lap, forgotten that I sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough that I could feel her presence. The floor was cold beneath me, but I barely noticed. I looked at her, studying the curve of her jaw, the way a small piece of hair had fallen across her cheek. She still looked uncertain, like she didn't quite believe this was real. I wanted to reach out and touch her hand, but I waited. Let her come to me if she needed to. Let her feel safe. "I've been writing about you," she said softly, almost too soft to hear. My heart jumped. Not everything. But a lot of it. I didn't know how to tell you, so I wrote it instead. Her voice cracked just a little, and she looked down, embarrassed. I swallowed hard. "I figured," I replied gently. "Or at least, I hoped." She looked back up at me then, and there was something so open in her face, so completely raw, that it made my breath catch in my throat. "I didn't think you'd ever feel the same way," she admitted. "You've always been so calm, so hard to read. And I didn't want to ruin what we had." She paused, biting her lip. But it was getting harder to hide it. So I started writing after midnight, when it felt safe. When you were asleep and the world was quiet. I listened, feeling every word soak into me like rain after a long drought. "I noticed," I said softly. "Not just the writing. I noticed you. Every day. Every small thing. I just didn't know what to do about it." She smiled then, that real, trembling kind of smile that people only wear when they're trying not to cry. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I reached out then, finally, and touched her hand. Her fingers flinched slightly at first, then relaxed into mine. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But maybe we start by just being honest. About everything." We sat there for a while, hands intertwined, hearts thudding between us. The tension that had wrapped around us for weeks began to loosen, untangle, unwind. She told me more, about the things she had written, the nights she stayed up thinking about what it might be like to kiss me, to hold me, to wake up next to me. I told her about the way she made me nervous in the best way, how I caught myself smiling for no reason when she walked into the room, how I memorized the sound of her laughter like it was my favorite song. That it was the first time either of us had said these things out loud, and every word felt like a release. The kind that left you feeling light but fragile, like one wrong step could shatter everything. But we didn't step wrong. Not that night. Instead, she leaned into me, slowly, her head resting on my shoulder. I closed my eyes and let the moment wrap around us like a blanket. There was no kiss. Not yet. It wasn't time. We didn't need it. Just being close, breathing each other in, was enough. We stayed there until our legs fell asleep and the lamp's light began to flicker. I helped her up, and we went to bed, not together, but connected now in a way we hadn't been before. She touched my arm before walking into her room, fingers grazing my skin, and whispered, "Good night." I turned and watched her go, a quiet smile on my face, my heart finally at peace. When I laid down, I could still feel the imprint of her fingers in my palm, like they were meant to be there. And for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep easily, without questions, without worry, just hope. Hope that whatever came next, we'd face it together. The morning after felt different in the smallest ways. The air was lighter, and for once, the silence didn't carry so much weight. I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks, maybe months. There was no twisting knot in my stomach, no racing thoughts about what she might be feeling. I knew now. We had said the things that were hardest to say, and somehow, it hadn't broken us. If anything, it felt like we had quietly begun to build something. I got out of bed slowly, unsure of what the day would bring but strangely okay with not knowing. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, barefoot and sleepy-eyed, her hoodie draped loosely over her frame. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, a real smile, one that didn't seem to hide anything. "Hey," she said softly. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah. You?" She shrugged. "Better than usual." There was a pause, not awkward, just quiet. Then she added, "I was thinking maybe we could go for a walk today. If you want." I could tell it took effort for her to suggest it, like she was still testing the waters of whatever we were becoming. I smiled and said yes. We ended up walking to a nearby park, the kind with crooked benches and trees that had forgotten how to grow straight. It wasn't anything special, but it gave us space to breathe, to talk without walls between us. We walked side by side, not touching, but our steps fell in sync. She told me stories about her childhood, her family, things I hadn't heard before. I listened, genuinely, wanting to memorize each detail. I told her things too, about my fears, my doubts, about how long I had been drawn to her without fully understanding why. The way she listened made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. And just when I thought we'd found our rhythm, she slowed her pace and asked, "Are we okay like this? Or, is this moving too fast?" Her voice was careful, like she was afraid of the answer that I stopped walking. She did too. I looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "It's not too fast. It's just, finally real." Her expression softened, her shoulders easing as she nodded. But I could still sense hesitation beneath her calm. And I understood. As easy as it was to share how we felt in the quiet of night, daylight made everything feel sharper, more exposed. She reached for my hand then, her fingers brushing against mine. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. I held onto it tightly, letting her know I wasn't going anywhere. Later that day, back at the apartment, something shifted. We were in the kitchen cooking dinner together, cutting vegetables, stealing bites, laughing about how terrible we both were at measuring things. It felt natural. Like we'd done it 100 times. But when she accidentally spilled water on the floor and reached for a towel, our eyes met in that same familiar way they had days ago. Only this time, we didn't look away. There was a beat. A quiet moment where the space between us felt thinner. She took a step closer, her fingers still damp, her expression unsure but open. I felt it before it happened, the gentle pull, the magnetic warmth. But before our lips could touch, she paused and whispered, "I'm scared." I didn't ask why. I already knew that, so I took a slow breath and replied, "Me too. But I think it's okay to be scared." She nodded, and we stood there, forehead to forehead, the kiss forgotten for now. What mattered more was knowing that we were both still in it, still choosing each other, even if the road ahead felt uncertain. That night, we curled up on the couch together under one blanket, neither of us saying much. The TV played quietly in the background, but we weren't really watching. Her head rested on my shoulder, and I ran my fingers through her hair gently. The small touches, the closeness, the safety, we didn't need anything else right then. But I could still feel her heartbeat through her skin, fast and unsteady. She was still scared. So was I. But there was something stronger underneath the fear now, a quiet promise that we wouldn't run from it anymore. As the night deepened, and the apartment grew still again, she looked up at me and whispered, "Do you think this is real?" I met her gaze and nodded. "Yeah. I do." She smiled faintly, then closed her eyes, letting out a breath she'd been holding. And for the first time since all of this started, she didn't sneak away at midnight. She stayed. With me. Wrapped in warmth, in quiet, in something that felt like the very beginning of love. The sun came in gently the next morning, brushing across her face where she lay beside me on the couch, still half asleep. I didn't move. I just watched her breathe, watched the way her lips twitched slightly as if she were still dreaming. It felt unreal, how close we were now, after all the distance we used to keep between us. I remembered the silence that once filled this apartment, how heavy and uncertain it had been, and now, it was something else entirely. There was still silence, yes, but it felt warm now, full of understanding, like it had shifted into something that wrapped around us instead of pulling us apart. She stirred slowly, her eyelashes fluttering as she blinked up at me. For a second, she looked confused. Then she smiled. A soft, sleepy, real smile. "Hey," she murmured. I ran my fingers gently down her arm. "Hey," I whispered back. We didn't need anything more than that. Not yet. Later, we made breakfast together again, but this time with music playing low in the background. She danced a little while flipping pancakes, and I laughed, calling her ridiculous. She stuck her tongue out and kept dancing anyway, twirling around the kitchen in her socks. There was something so light in the moment, something so full of breath and space, it made my chest ache with how good it felt. It wasn't perfect. We were still figuring things out, still a little awkward, still afraid of pushing too hard or too fast, but we were in it together. That was what mattered, that we spent the day together, running errands, doing laundry, folding clothes side by side. The kind of things that sound boring until you do them with someone who makes everything feel easy. We didn't talk much about what we were now. We didn't label it. Maybe because naming it made it feel more fragile. Or maybe because we both understood, in our own way, that whatever this was didn't need a definition to be real. That evening, we sat on the balcony with mugs of tea in hand, the sky painted with streaks of orange and pink. She leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. I felt her fingers find mine and squeeze gently. For a while, we just watched the sky change, the world softening around us. And then she said, almost in a whisper, "I used to feel so alone here. Even with you around. I thought I had to hide everything. My feelings. My writing. I thought if I told you the truth, you'd pull away." I turned to look at her, my chest tightening. "I was scared too," I said. Scared of ruining what we had. Scared of being wrong. But hiding it didn't make the feelings go away. It just made them heavier. She nodded slowly, eyes glassy with emotion. "I don't want to hide anymore." I reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then don't. We don't have to rush. We just go slow. Be real. Be here." She let out a shaky breath and leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. It was small, gentle, but it made my heart swell so fast it hurt. "I've wanted to do that for so long," she said, pulling back just enough to look me in the eyes. I smiled. "Me too." We stayed on the balcony until the sky turned dark, and even then, we didn't move. We just sat there, wrapped in a kind of silence that only happens when two people finally stop pretending. When we finally came inside, the apartment felt warmer somehow. Not because of the lights or the weather, but because something had shifted between us, something invisible but strong, that we brushed our teeth side by side, bumping elbows and laughing, and when we climbed into bed, together this time, she curled into me like it was the most natural thing in the world. I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Safety. A quiet, steady kind of love. As I lay there, listening to her breathing even out in sleep, I thought back to the very first night I heard her in the hallway. The whispers. The locked doors. The mystery that had once kept us apart. And now, all of that was gone. Not forgotten, but transformed. Because what she did after midnight didn't just change my nights. It changed everything. It broke down the walls we'd both built around ourselves and left us standing face to face with something real. Something worth holding on to, and now, here we are. If this story touched something in you, share it. Let someone else feel what you felt. Maybe you've been there too, watching someone from across the silence, waiting for a sign that you're not alone in what you feel. Or maybe you're in the middle of your own midnight moment, unsure of what comes next. If so, don't be afraid to listen to your heart. It knows more than you think. If you'd like more stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you do after midnight if someone you loved was just one whisper away? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more emotional, real-life inspired lesbian love stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and tell us in the comments, have you ever had a midnight moment that changed everything? Your story could inspire the next one. Turn on the bell icon so you never miss the kind of stories that stay with you long after the screen fades.